Dickens, your dope black therapist. And tonight I got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. But before we begin, I just want to welcome everyone. If you're new, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to have an amazing experience tonight. If you happen to be on my YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, and share. We want to give good content out. Next week, we have an amazing guest speaker. I won't even say who it is yet, but she's a sex therapist and she's coming to talk about sexual dysfunction and difficulty with intimacy and how that can be a traumatizing experience for a couple as well as for an individual. So there'll be a flyer going out later on today. So please make sure that you log on to my personal website, CandiceRDickens.com. Sign up for our newsletters and I'll make sure you get that information. Also, I will be speaking in November. I will be in Los Angeles in Crenshaw. So all my Crenshaw family out there, hello, I can't wait to see you. We're going to have some waffles and chicken, all that great stuff. I'll be there on November 3rd and 4th, talking about the polyvagal theory applied to the BIPOC communities. Tickets are going fast, so make sure you get your tickets. You can buy tickets at Well Play University. That's Well Play University, November 3rd and 4th. All-day training with CEUs. Going to be a great experience. And for those of you who are new and those of you who are not, please make sure that you get some of our free trauma-informed cards. What they do is they offer you an opportunity to have at least 31 coping skills so that if you're going through something, you can't reach a family member, a provider, a spiritual leader, you'll be able to look at all these coping skills and you'll some of them that will help regulate you and stabilize you and create safety. On the front are two 24-hour crisis hotlines that you can text and speak with someone who can help you get through any situation. And also on the front is our website, Color of Trauma and Healing, where we specialize in providing trauma for the BIPOC community. For those who don't know what BIPOC is, that's Brown, Indigenous, people of color. It's not just mental health clinicians. We have massage therapists, doula, acupuncturists. Everyone's there. So visit Color of Trauma and Healing, find a provider that meets your needs, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. If you're a provider, an acupuncturist, a therapist, a yogi, a doula, a social worker, psychologist, and you're an addiction specialist, a family therapist, sex therapist, any type of healer. If you're interested in being part of our, I call it the Wakanda effect, when you want to do the work of healing a nation, healing a community, log on. We would love to have you. Membership is free for the first 60 days and just check us out. So with that said, let's get into the topic. When I was getting ready for this discussion, my mind kept floating back to the topic that was the biggest topic of early this year, and it was the infamous slap, right? Does everybody remember the infamous slap between Will Smith and Chris Rock? If you have been busy living under a rock, if you have been working or you're in school, you may have missed it. If you were out of the country, you may have missed it. I don't know how you missed that though, because everybody was talking about it all around the world. But I'm going to set it up because it goes back to the drama part that we're talking about, the trauma and the drama, and how that connects to the polyvagal nerve, which is a part of all of this experience. Will Smith, for many of you who know his history from his interviews or read his book, is from Philly. He is I think he's a middle child of a two-parent household. And his father was former military and a very strict man. And this was a man who really tried to instill in his children discipline. And that if you say you're going to do something, do something. If you have a mission, complete the mission. Because military talk is about mission and duty and honor, right? And this is a man who owned his own store and who tried to instill all those things into his sons. But he did it the way the military does it. He did it by instilling fear. He did it by instilling some physical practices that today could be seen as child abuse. But back then, they were just seen as my dad is just a hands-on kind of person. So one of the stories that Will Smith, I'm not giving with the book, so you can buy the book. But I will say this, one of the stories he talks about is, going outside to buy his dad some cigarettes and being happy that he completed the mission. And he was on his way back and someone had introduced a Nerf football to him. And he was like, wow, he had never seen it. This is, I guess, the early 80s. He had never seen one. And he had, as soon as he was about to toss the ball to his friend, he looked at his friend's face and there was fear. And he turned around and there was his father. And his father jacked him up, grabbed him by his shirt and said, when I tell you to do something and I put you on a mission, you better do it. And dragged him home and then began hitting him once he got into the house. But that created a climate of powerlessness for this child, who then became a man, right? Who specialized in being these superheroes, or this person who defends the universe from aliens. But it also created in this book an experience for a young man who couldn't defend himself, but bigger than that, could not defend his siblings who were younger than him, and could not defend his mother from being physically abused by the same man who was trying to discipline him and teaching him honor. So he talks about watching the abuse and being so ashamed that he could not defend his mom. So he became like the jokester. He became the person that realized, if I make him laugh or I distract him, maybe he won't hurt her and maybe he won't hurt us. Right? If I don't do anything wrong, if I just do what he wants me to do, then maybe that will buy me some time. So the drama becomes created in his mind, that this is how I cope, right? This is how I, if I'm in situations, this is how I take care of it. I people please, or I stretch out and I try to protect everyone, even if it means I put me at harm. Jada Pinkett was raised by a mother who was addicted to drugs, and his mother is very open and honest about that on the Red Table Talk. Addicted to drugs, um, worked as a nurse professionally, was a nurse, and her grandparents, who were also in the medical profession, really helped raise her. But there were times, as you know, when you are raised by an addict, when there's instability. And at one point, she began really raising herself and drifting onto the streets, and never feeling like there was stability, never feeling like there was anyone to protect her. So she had to go to the streets to create a means of protection for herself. So not surprisingly, the characters that she plays are very strong people, right? People who don't show people weakness, who don't show vulnerability. What happens early in life when you have those experiences, it changes who you are. It changes how your brain operates, right? Because the way the brain works, so there are three parts of the brain. There's the part that we all hear about, especially if you are familiar with ADHD, the prefrontal lobe, when you think about what you're thinking. So I'm put my hand on my forehead and I'm like, what am I thinking? Why did I just do that? Oh, my hands are really cold. I must be nervous. I'm thinking about what I'm thinking. Now I'm thinking, wow, I'm really talking really fast. I'm aware of myself. I'm aware of what I'm doing. I'm aware that I'm just not in my head. And then there's the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. And people don't realize the emotions are not in your heart, they're in your brain. They're in the back of your brain, all the way back here, the limbic system. We call that the mammalian brain, right? And this is the brain that has your emotions, your feelings, your sensations. And right next to that part, the emotional brain, is the hippocampus structure. And think about the hippos. Hippos never forget. So near those emotions are the part of the brain that has the memory. So when information comes in through the body or through the senses, it goes to the, people think it goes to the front. No, it goes to the back. Look for meaning. Like, what does this mean? How does it make you feel? And goes to the hippocampus. What does this mean? And then it gets processed by the cortex to see, do you know what this is? And then it goes to the neocortex. I know what this is. It's da 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 da. Right? So that's the second part, is the limbic system, which is called the mammalian part, because it's the evolution. But the oldest part of the brain, the third, what people say is the first part of the brain, is the reptilian part of the brain. Think about a reptile. If you live in Florida or any place that has reptiles, they're like lizards, right? That when there's a loud noise, they scatter. When you come into the room, they like scatter. If you're from New York and Maryland, they're like the roaches. I'm sorry, I shouldn't stereotype, but you know what I mean. If you're from Maryland and New York, but if you're from someplace, there's a whole lot of lizards, like Florida or California. When there's a large movement, right? Lizards are primal species because they function just through sensations. They function through that flight. They run, or if you've ever seen a lizard on the tree, it's frozen. It might even turn a color, right? It tries to blend in for safety. That this is the oldest system because this system is our reptilian system and it's connected to the brain system. So the brain system's in the back of our spine, right? And this system's connected to a nerve called the polyvagal nerve. And the polyvagal nerve goes from the brain system to the brain, and then it comes from the cranial part of the brain. All these big terms, right? But I'm going to break it down. Don't worry about it. And this nerve is called, it's the 10th cranial nerve, comes from the brain system, brain stem to the brain, comes out to the cranial, and we call it the wandering nerve because it goes all throughout the body. Have you ever been anxious or angry and your face is like this, right? And then your throat gets tight? It's because this nerve, the goes from the cranium, which is the skull, goes all throughout. So it hits your face, so your face is tight, right? Hits the back of your neck, so that the throat gets tight, and it travels to the adrenal gland, releases adrenaline. Adrenaline hits the organs like the heart and the lungs, makes the lungs go from nice and fluffy to tight because the body's getting ready for flight. And if you are ready for a fight or flight, then body can't be loose. You got to be ready, right? Like Mike Tyson ready. And it gets the heart beating. So if the lungs are getting tight, then the heart's not getting a lot of oxygen and it beats faster. And the heart loops to the brain through the aorta. And it's like, hey, think faster. We don't get enough oxygen. Think faster, right? But this is the thing about the body, that when the brainstem is activated, reptilian brain, and then the emotional brain is activated, this part that thinks about what you're thinking, that goes offline. It goes offline. You can't think when you're in the emotional part of the brain because the emotional part of the brain is a part that senses. It feels things, which is why when people have traumatic experiences, they can't really tell you how they're feeling. They will show you. You'll know that they're tense, or they'll start crying, or they're, oh my God, or they're rocking, right? Because the thinking part belongs to this part, it's the narrative part, which is why when I have clients who come into my office, they'll start telling me a story and then they'll get emotional because they're feeling it, right? It's like having a movie with the music, that the feeling part comes in, and then eventually, if I have a client, they stop being able to talk because the polyvagal nerve doesn't know that the event that's traumatic happened years ago. It doesn't remember that Will Smith is not 8 years old anymore, that he's 52, 53, or 54. All it knows is something happened and I never forgot it because the emotional part of the brain is right next to the memories. And the body says, what's familiar about this feeling of fear? Or what's familiar about this feeling of being powerless and watching a woman get hurt, right? Especially if he looks at her face. And this is part of the polyvagal nerve, right? Because the polyvagal is like our smoke detector. It scans for danger. It looks for what's wrong and what's familiar, right? And what he always says is, I felt like I failed my mother, and I made a promise to not fail any other woman, even if it's at my expense. So when he looks at his wife, who has a tight look, and there's a part of the polyvagal nerve where it's like detects things, right? And it looks for danger. And there are times where it gets enough cues that it goes, oh, that's dangerous. But what happens when it can't quite tell if something's dangerous or not dangerous? It's almost like me as a woman going into a room, me as a woman and as a human going into a field, and there are all these elephants and these giraffes, and I panic. Why? Because there are no other humans. They're just elephants, giraffes, and I am powerless. So then I panic. One of the things that happens is that the polyvagal nerve signals to the brain that this is not safe. And when if it's not safe, it says, turn the alarm on. So what happens? The limbic system gets activated. The polyvagal nerve sends a message to all parts of the body. The body gets tight. Adrenaline gets released. Oxytocin, another chemical, gets released because adrenaline only lasts in your system for about 20 seconds. But it's that cortisol that keeps it in the system longer, which is why when people get anxious, we'll say, hey, you're anxious not because of the adrenaline, it's because you're releasing cortisol now. And you've got to do things to bring that cortisol level down. If not, you're going to stay activated and you won't be able to tell the difference between being activated and not activated. You won't be able to tell if something is still chasing you or if you're just thinking about it because the body has no sense of time. So something could be chasing you and you're running because your polyvagal nerve says there's danger, or I'm running because there are too many giraffes and I can't tell 5 minutes later or 5 miles later that nothing's chasing me because my brain is still saying, hey, there's danger. And when there's danger, What gets activated is that fight flight response, where I'm either going to fight that thing, I'm going to fight the giraffes, or I'm going to start running. And for most of us, um, we make a choice if it's something that we can deal with, something that's our size, or something that we can dominate, we fight. But if it's something that we can't and it's too big for us, it's too risky for us, then there's a part of us that says, nah, I'm gonna avoid this one. I'm gonna procrastinate. I'm gonna run from it. I'm not gonna deal with it head to head. I'm gonna make the healthy decision to live another day. I'm gonna flight. But there's another system that happens when something is too big to fight and too dominant to run from. This is a cliffhanger. I'm gonna plug my thing in. Hold on. What do you think that system's called? I'm back. The system is called, it's the shutdown. When we had the polyvagal, it's three parts. The first part is the ventral vagal. The second part is the activation, the sympathetic activation, which makes us fight or flight. But the third part is the dorsal part. It's the dorsal part of the sympathetic nervous system. And this is the part that shuts down. So when he's looking at his wife, right? And he's in attunement because I said that the polyvagal nerve has three parts, right? The first part is I'm looking at the person, they're smiling at me, I'm smiling at them. We call it co-regulation. We're tuned. We're laughing. He's so funny. That guy, Chris, he's so funny. She's laughing, I'm like, we call it attunement, regulation, right? And then I realized that I'm not laughing anymore, and she's not laughing at all. My brain, my polyvagal brain that looking for danger goes, oh no, I missed something. And he says, turn the alarm on. It's time for us to either fight, flight, or I got to shut down because it's too much for me. So then he sees her because he's not able to pick up a cue that she's safe. All he sees is she's not laughing anymore. Because I think we all saw that she was laughing, right? And that might be her getting activated from Baltimore. You're not gonna punk me. I'm not gonna show weakness. I'm just gonna let it go over my head. But then what's underneath the laugh is pain. And I think many of us who have traumatic experiences, sometimes we don't want to show people that we're uncomfortable. So we put the mask on, right? Because that mask is a way we protect ourselves. But when people aren't protecting themselves, the first thing they do is we try to connect. We talk with people, we lean in on people, we sit with people, we do co-regulation because regulation is about connection. Because we're born out of co-regulation. The sperm and the ovum connected. Baby in the mother's uterus, connection. The baby comes out. Who's the first voice they look for? Is mama. Connection, right? We're born out of connection. Babies crying, we rock them, we do connection, right? That's the first thing because that polyvagal nerve is looking for connection. And when there's a disruption in that connection, when someone's upset or it figures that you're not safe and you can't connect to talk about it, it turns on the body that says now it's time either fight or flight, or if it's too big for you, let's shut down. So when he saw his wife reveal vulnerability, that old tape, right? That old narrative comes back. And a narrative is like a movie. And the drama part is what is your role in that movie? What is the role that you either inherited from your lifeline, from your family line? What is the whole role that you inherited through your trauma? Like if you're Kevin Hart and you've got a father who is an addict, who's inconsistent, what is the role that you play in this family? So if your brother's the bad one, he's the one that gets in trouble and you're Kevin Hart, what's the role? Oh, I'm the funny one. I'm the responsible one. I'm the one that gets all the good grades. I'm the one that mom poured everything in. That is the drama. What is the role that you got assigned historically? Or what is the role that you took on to help you protect you so that you can live another day and survive each moment? And if you're Will Smith, whose brain said, whoa, this is a neuroception mismatch because I'm laughing and she's not. So this must not be safe. Even though there were cues that she was safe, there were no guards um, taking Chris Rock off the stage. She wasn't bleeding, she wasn't harmed. But for him, right? And this is where the drama comes in, because drama is historical. So when I watch Young and the Restless, I'm watching the history. I'm watching Miss Chandler's kids do this and this and this. It's historical. If I'm watching Real Housewives of Atlanta, I'm watching a drama, and I'm watching each person's history show up on the screen. If I'm watching Star Wars, I'm watching what's historical, right? I'm watching what happened to Luke, happened to this relative, and then what happened to this person following Luke. I'm watching the history of how things play out, and I'm watching what role each person has inherited because of what happened to their people. So if I look at people who have been oppressed, um, brown, indigenous people of color, African American people, Latino people, Hispanic people, Asian American people, people who've been oppressed, Caribbean people have been oppressed, then there's something historical because their brain says this is not safe, and I've got to do that's going to keep me safe. So sometimes we act unconsciously out of habit and out of safety, and we jump into a role of either a fighter or an avoider or a procrastinator, right? Because our brain wants to make sure that we can survive. And then we teach that to our children how to survive. So if I'm Will Smith again and I'm looking at her face, my thinking is not on my watch. And who shows up? The person who was that little boy who was involved in this trauma and drama. And in that drama, his role was the pleaser. His role was the protector of his mother that, according to him, he failed at becoming, because we play a role, and every role has a narrative, right? Like if I watch one of those reality shows, like what's your tagline? What's your storyline? What are you supposed to be about? What are you supposed to be doing? What's the thing that you told yourself that's happening? What's the narrative, right? And for him, it was not on my watch. So he walked up there, and he didn't see Chris Rock. He saw his narrative. He saw a man who had power, because who's on the stage, like who has the mic, has the power, right? He saw the power and he saw it played out. And remember I said about the emotional brain, when the emotional brain's on, the logical brain is off, that prefrontal brain is off. That front part is off, but the part that's on is the cortex. And what the cortex does, it goes, wow, this looks at patterns, right? What's similar about this pattern? This part looks at what that pattern is. Oh, I know what that pattern is. That's a square. Or I know what that pattern is. That's a circle. Or I know what that pattern is. All those stripes is a zebra. This part can't analyze what the pattern is. All this part knows is that's a pattern. This pattern has helped our ancestors who are cavemen figure out if it roars, it has a hairy face, and it's fast. That's a dangerous animal. Didn't have a name, right? If it looks at enough patterns, then I back up. So when he got activated, all he saw was a male of power, right? That was in a dominant position because he was sitting down and had to look up, right? And there's a memory with the body, and the body remembers him looking up at a man. And if you remember, children look up at adults. And he wasn't in this moment. He was in the moment where he was that little boy looking up at another man hurting a woman. So that slap was not about him. And her being stoic, right? Because she didn't move. And people kept saying, why didn't she move? But here's the thing about the body. Once that polyvagal nerve senses danger, we call it neuroception, right? There's perception, neuroception. Neuroception is that feeling in your body that says something ain't right. Excuse me. My mother's watching this. I got to use good English. When something in your body says something is not right, it picks on something. You can't tell why you don't get in that elevator, but something says, something's not right. Or I just got this vibe. It's neurologically, you're picking up on something through your senses. Perception is this part. When you think about something like, I think, or it's your memories or perceptions, your lived in experiences, it's cognitive. This is body. And 80% of what happens to you gets interpreted through the body, right? So if I sense that something is not good and I don't want to be the old Jada, but maybe the old Jada who had a mother who was an addict, maybe she froze or she escaped. And when something, you can't beat something, you can't run because my husband's about to get an award, the thing that we do sometimes we shut down. We do what deers do, right? If you ever watch a deer, when he gets frozen, it's like this. Because it's so paralyzed by fear or flooded through anxiety or flooded through the parasympathetic nervous system. But it's not the nervous system that activates you into motion. It's the nervous system that causes you to shut down out of survival because it's not safe to move, just like a deer in a headlight. So she's shutting down and she's just watching it in a shut down place. Similar to if you're a child of an addict and you can't stop your parent from using drugs, you're in a shut down place and you're back in your own trauma and the trauma experience of being powerless. I'm powerless over my hair that's come out. I'm powerless over what's happened um, with this man making a joke about me. I'm powerless. And I'm in front of all these people who are my peers. And I'm powerless about who can laugh at me or not powerless. I'm powerless. But I'm sitting there and my powerlessness is showing on my face, as well as my vulnerability. And she is shut down. And what we'll say to people is when people shut down, the heart rate slows, the breathing slows. They have a whole intestinal experience because this is the part we call the dorsal ventral. Anything's dorsal is underneath the diaphragm, right? Ventral is the breath. So if I'm breathing, I'm pumped up and I'm activated. So when this man got up there, hand movement, she's still sitting like this, shut down. And when he got down, he was still activated. Keep my wife's mouth out my mouth name out your mouth, going back and forth. But then I had Chris Rock, who was bullied the whole time. And this is the thing about drama, right? The brain has a way of it knows what it knows. And it knows it because habitually we're creatures of habit. If you have seen me at different conventions, different workshops, or you know me personally, you know that I have a part always in my hair. No matter what color my hair is, there's always a part. If you see me out someplace, most clothes I wear are like dark colors. If you know me, I'm a creature of habit, always. And for a lot of people, they go shopping and they come back with the same kind of clothes, or they pick the same kind of cars. We're creatures of habit. Why? Because the brain likes patterns and it likes familiarity. And if you're Chris Rock and your earliest memory that gets embedded is being bullied, being picked on, and that's the earliest memory, and the way that you dealt with it is by shutting down, right? If I can't fight you and I can't run, I just got to take it. I'm shut down. And when I saw that man not even raise his hands, I was like, oh, he's shut down. He's been here before because the body knows how to survive. And it keeps that trauma, which is a narrative, which is a story, which is the experience, in motion. And he slipped right back into where he was, which is why a lot of people saying, if that were me, I would have fought. Maybe, and maybe you were a fighter, but if you're a victim of abuse, only thing you know how to do is to survive, is to escape. And the brain doesn't have any sense of time. It doesn't know that in your 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, that the person who bullied you in first grade is not the same person. It just knows that's that person that bothered me, and you get angry. The brain has no sense of time. Someone could offend you in January and it's all the way in November and you're still upset about it. Has no sense of time, right? So when these people got activated, they all went back to a different time of their lives where the trauma had them stuck in a certain role and the trauma never was discharged. It never was released. They never dealt with it, right? And trauma lives in the body, which is why if you've been watching my shows, we often talk about talk therapy alone doesn't help because you're talking to the part of the brain that was off when the traumatic thing happened because trauma happens in the body. It lives in the emotions, which is why when I call my guests dope therapists, it's because they realize that they have to do the things to bring you out of the trauma that's in your body. Because when you have the experience, it stays in the body and it gets stuck in the nervous system, which is why people get agitated really easily. We say, well, you never completed it, right? You've never really moved it or addressed it because whenever you get upset, you shut down. Or whenever you get upset, you're going to fight. But you never go to what the original issue was that upset you. So if I'm Jada Pinkett, you never went to the original issue of powerlessness. If you're Will Smith, never went to the original issue of him being ashamed of not being able to defend himself, his siblings, or his mother. And if you're Chris Rock, never went to the original issue of being abused. Because something he said after the award show was, it's funny, recently everybody's been bossing me around. He said, that slap just woke me out of it, that everybody's been bossing me around. I've been showing up for things I didn't want to do. And that is the cycle. And part of coming out of that cycle, right, is really giving yourself an opportunity to slow down that breath and notice where am I at now. This is why I'll say to people, shake it out. Just like even with animals, every animal after they had a big thing where they're activated or deactivated, just notice that, wait a minute, I'm shut down. Move your legs, move your hands, turn back on the body. Notice that you're quiet, open mouth or hum. When I said there's a polyvagal nerve in the back of your throat and there's a whole bunch in your chest, what we'll say is hum, bring you back online. or rock, bring the body back online, right? Because when we get activated, the body takes over. And there's a part of the brain we call the amygdala hijack. And that's the part that's like the flight system. It goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Send more hormones, get the body reactivated. But what we'll do is we'll say to people, let your brain, let your body know that you are not that little person anymore, that you can make a different choice, right? And you've got to calm down the body to bring back on this part of the brain, right? Because this part won't come on if the body's so activated. So what I'll tell people often to do is, are you tapping? Are you tapping? Are your feet on the ground? Right? Take a breath. I know you're upset. Take a breath, but don't do this breath. It's bad. Why? Because that speeds up your heart. And what I said is about activation is the speed up experience where the body's ready for the fight experience. So if you're holding your breath, it speeds back at the heart. I want that heart to slow down. I want it to be, and say your name. My name is Candice Dickens. How old are you? Say your age. Bring you back into the awareness of who you are. I just saw Woman King, right? And what I love is that they said their name. I love Black Panther because there was a scene that mother said, tell them who you are. And he said his name. Remember who you are and where you're at. And there's another way of dealing with this than the way you dealt it when you were a child. And there's another role you can take other than your traditional role of either fighter, flighter, comedian, advocate, lover, lost child, or innocent, because they're all roles that we slip into that go back to our child experiences. That you can experience something different if you give your body permission to cool down and you give your mind permission to come back online. And if it means standing up or just walking away from something and then coming back. Don't escape, because when we escape, we don't come back. Come back and see if you see it differently. So I would love to hear from you guys. Send me a text or send me a message at CandiceRDickens.com. I look forward to hearing from everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next week. You've been amazing. Um, don't forget to check out. I'll be in LA. I posted on LinkedIn. I'll be in LA for 2 days training on polyvagal theory and treating the BIPOC community. I hope to see you all there. But if I don't see you, I'll be at the MATE conference next year. I'll be at the Psychotherapy Networker. See, my polyvagal nerve is activated because I'm excited. I'll be at the Polyvagal Networker in March talking about polyvagal and mass violence. So have a good evening, and thank you again for participating. Take care, and don't forget, if you're a provider, we want you to be part of our Wakanda. Bye.